Greg and Della had defied the odds with a high school romance that had seemingly stood the test of time for 40 years. They first met when Della was just a freshman and Greg a sophomore. Their bond was instant, almost mythical, a love that many envied. But life, as it often does, took its toll. Greg went off to Alaska for work, and their communication dwindled until it eventually stopped. Della was left alone during her final year of high school, her heart still tied to Greg, despite his silence. Years passed. Della went to college, graduated, and met me at a party when she was 24. I fell for her instantly, and I thought she felt the same way. Our marriage was strong, or so I believed. We had a daughter, Joan, who became the center of our lives. Despite some bumps along the way, I was content. But Greg, the man who had disappeared from Della's life, never really left her heart. The first sign of trouble came 2 days before our wedding when Greg sent Della a letter. He wanted to meet her, to reconnect. Thankfully, Della's mother intervened, urging her to focus on her new life with me. Della chose to stay with me, and we embarked on our 30-year journey together. But even after all those years, the shadow of Greg lingered. Our marriage had its ups and downs, but I never doubted Della's loyalty until recently. Greg had resurfaced, texting Della, and she responded eagerly. When I questioned her, she brushed it off, saying he was just an old friend who needed support. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The final blow came when Della confessed that she still had feelings for Greg, feelings that had never truly faded. And so, we find ourselves here. Our daughter Joan is grown and married, and I'm nearing retirement, looking forward to a peaceful life. But that peace was shattered the day Della told me Greg had moved 2 streets away from us. My world, once secure and predictable, has been thrown into chaos. The day after her confession, I found myself in a restaurant with Della, trying to process the bombshell she had dropped on me. As we finished our meal, I turned to her, my voice calm but filled with tension. "So Della, you said Greg is back. What does that mean for us?" Her eyes were filled with regret, but also a determination that scared me. "Jake, I can't promise you anything. I still love you, but I love Greg too. I need time to figure this out." Her words cut deep, but I knew I had to keep my composure. "Della, we've been together for 30 years. We've built a life, a family. You can't just throw that away." "I don't want to throw it away," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "But I can't ignore these feelings. I need to see where this goes with Greg." The drive home was silent, both of us lost in our thoughts. That night, Della reached out to me, but I turned away, unable to bear the thought of her being with someone else. I slept in the guest room, hoping that the distance might make her reconsider. But the next morning, she was more resolved than ever. "Jake, I've made up my mind. I need to spend time with Greg to see if what we had is still there. I need a year. After that, I'll come back to you, and we can start over." Her words were like a knife to the heart. "A year? You want me to wait for a year while you figure out if you still love me?" She nodded, her expression pleading. "Please, Jake. Give me this time. I promise I'll come back to you." I was filled with a mix of sadness, anger, and disbelief. "Fine, Della, take your year, but don't expect me to be here waiting with open arms. You may come back to find that I'm not the same man you left." And so, she left. The house felt emptier than ever, the silence deafening. I threw myself into work, trying to forget the pain, but it lingered, a constant reminder of the life I had lost. Weeks passed, and the distance between us grew. I changed the locks on the house, hoping it would give me some sense of control. But the truth was, I was lost, unsure of how to move forward. Then one evening, I received a call from my daughter Joan. She had just had dinner with her mother and Greg, and she was furious. "Dad, how could Mom do this to you? How could she just leave after all these years?" I sighed, trying to find the right words. "I don't know, sweetheart. I don't understand it myself. But your mother is determined to follow her heart, even if it means breaking ours in the process." "Are you going to take her back?" Joan asked, her voice filled with concern. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know if I can forgive her for this." As the weeks turned into months, I realized that I couldn't keep living in limbo. I needed to take control of my life, to find a way to move on. I began to focus on myself, on rebuilding the pieces of my life that Della had shattered. The year passed slowly, each day a struggle to keep going. But I did. finding strength in the support of my friends and family. And when the year was up, Della came back, just as she had promised. But I was no longer the man she had left. The pain, the betrayal, had changed me. I had learned to stand on my own, to find happiness outside of our marriage. And when she asked if we could start over, I looked into her eyes and saw the woman I had once loved. But I also saw the woman who had broken my heart. Della, I said, my voice steady, I'm glad you're back, but I can't go through this again. We've had our time, and it's over. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time, I felt at peace. I had found closure, not in her return, but in my ability to let go. And so we parted ways, not as enemies, but as two people who had once loved deeply but had grown apart. I walked away from that chapter of my life with my head held high, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The journey had been long and painful, but in the end, I had found myself again. And that, more than anything, was the true victory. As Della walked out of my life for the last time, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. The house, once filled with echoes of laughter and shared moments, now felt like a hollow shell. Yet it was also a canvas for a new beginning, a space where I could rebuild, redefine, and reclaim my life. I stood in the quiet of the living room, the ticking of the clock, the only sound in the room. The past year had been a test of endurance, of holding on to hope while preparing for the worst. But now, with Della gone for good, I realized that my journey wasn't about waiting for her to return. It was about The first step was acknowledging the emptiness. The memories that once brought comfort now felt like weights, dragging me down into the depths of sorrow. I knew I couldn't live in a museum of the past. We spent the rest of the afternoon together, talking and laughing, as if the weight of the past year had lifted. Little Thomas babbled and giggled, his presence a reminder of the joy that still existed in the world. As I held him in my arms, I realized that the future wasn't something to be feared. It was something to embrace. In the following weeks, I threw myself into new activities. I joined a hiking group, reconnecting with nature in a way I hadn't done in years. The mountains became my sanctuary, each climb a metaphor for my journey upward, away from the depths of despair. The physical exertion was therapeutic, the fresh air and open spaces clearing my mind and filling my lungs with renewed energy. I also started taking cooking classes, something I'd always been curious about, but never had the time to pursue. It was strange at first to navigate the kitchen without Della, who had always been the one to prepare our meals. But as I learned the art of creating new dishes, I found joy in the simple act of nourishing myself, of crafting something beautiful and delicious with my own hands. Through these new experiences, I began to meet new people, friends who didn't know me as Della's husband, but simply as Jake. They were people who saw me for who I was, not who I used to be, and that was liberating. With each new friendship, I felt the old ties that bound me to the past loosening, making room for the future. One evening, after a particularly satisfying hike, I returned home to find a letter in the mail. The handwriting was familiar, and my heart skipped a beat as I opened it. "Dear Jake," the letter began. "I know this may seem out of place, but I needed to reach out to you. I've had time to reflect on everything, and I realize now how much I took for granted. I understand if you don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to apologize for the pain I caused you. I wish you nothing but happiness in whatever path you choose. With love, Della." I stared at the letter for a long time, my emotions swirling. The apology was sincere, but it came too late. I was no longer the man who had waited for her, who had hoped she would choose him in the end. That man was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who had learned to stand on his own. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, alongside the few keepsakes I had decided to keep. Della's words were important, but they didn't define me. I had my own story to write, and it was time to start a new chapter. The months passed, and with them, the pain of the past began to fade. I found myself smiling more, laughing more, living more. The house, once a place of sorrow, now felt like home again, a home filled with my spirit, my energy, my life. One day, as I was finishing up a new recipe in the kitchen, the phone rang. It was Joan, calling to invite me to a family gathering. "Dad," she said, "we're having a barbecue this weekend. I'd love for you to come." I hesitated for a moment. memories of past gatherings with Della flashing through my mind. But then I realized that this was a new beginning, a chance to create new memories with the people I loved. "I'll be there," I replied, feeling a sense of anticipation. The barbecue was a turning point. Surrounded by family and friends, I felt a sense of belonging that had eluded me for so long. The laughter, the conversations, the warmth. It was a reminder that life goes on, that love and happiness are still possible, even after the darkest of times. As I sat in the backyard, watching Joan and Frank chase little Thomas around, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The journey had been long and painful, but I had come out on the other side stronger, wiser, and more in tune with myself. I raised my glass, toasting to the future, to new beginnings, and to the man I had become. The past was behind me, and the road ahead was full of promise. I was ready for whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength to face it with courage and grace. This was my life now, one of discovery, of growth, of endless possibilities. And as the sun set on that beautiful evening, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The day after the barbecue, I woke up with a sense of calm and clarity that I hadn't felt in a long time. The weight of the past had lifted, and I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. I had spent so much time grieving the life I had lost that I hadn't realized the possibilities that lay ahead. One of those possibilities arrived unexpectedly. A few days after the barbecue, I received an email from an old college friend, Mark Davis. We had been close during our university years, but life had taken us in different directions. He had moved to the West Coast and built a successful career in real estate, while I had stayed on the East Coast, focusing on my law practice and family. We had kept in touch sporadically, but it had been years since we last spoke. "Jake," the email began, "I heard through the grapevine that you're going through some tough times. I just wanted to reach out and see how you're doing. I'm going to be in your neck of the woods next week for a business conference. How about we catch up over dinner? It would be great to see you and reminisce about the good old days." I stared at the screen, surprised by the timing of Mark's message. It felt like another sign that the universe was nudging me toward a new chapter. I quickly replied, accepting his invitation and suggesting a local restaurant that had become one of my favorites. When the day of our dinner arrived, I was both excited and a little nervous. It had been so long since I had seen Mark, and I wondered how much we had both changed. But as soon as I walked into the restaurant and saw him waiting at a table, any apprehension melted away. "Jake," Mark exclaimed, standing up to give me a bear hug. "It's so good to see you, man. You haven't aged a day." I laughed, feeling a warmth spread through me at the sight of my old friend. "I could say the same about you, Mark. How's life treating you?" We sat down and ordered our drinks, quickly falling into easy conversation. It was as if no time had passed at all. We talked about our college days, the adventures we had shared, and it was comforting to reconnect with someone who knew me before life had become so complicated. As the evening progressed, our conversation turned more serious. Mark leaned back in his chair, studying me with a thoughtful expression. "So, Jake," he said carefully, "how are you really doing? I heard about Della. I'm sorry, man. I can't imagine what that must have been like." I sighed, taking a sip of my drink. "It was rough, Mark. There's no sugarcoating it, but I'm getting through it. I've had to learn to let go and focus on myself for the first time in a long time. It's been a journey, but I'm in a better place now." Mark nodded, his eyes filled with empathy. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve to be happy, Jake. You always were the steady one, the guy everyone could count on. It's good to see you taking care of yourself." "Thanks, Mark," I said, appreciating his words. "It's been a long road, but I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm figuring out who I am without Della, and it's been liberating in a way." He smiled, raising his glass in a toast, to new beginnings. I clinked my glass against his, feeling a sense of camaraderie and hope. "To new beginnings," I echoed. As we continued to talk, Mark shared more about his life on the West Coast. He had recently started a new venture, a real estate development firm that focused on sustainable housing. His passion for the project was evident, and I found myself inspired by his enthusiasm. "You know, Jake," Mark said after a while, "I could really use someone like you on my team. We're expanding, and having a sharp legal mind would be a huge asset. I know you're rooted here, but if you're ever looking for a change of scenery, the offer stands." I was taken aback by his proposal. The idea of uprooting my life and moving across the country had never crossed my mind. But as I listened to Mark describe the opportunities and challenges of his new venture, something stirred within me, a sense of excitement, of possibility. "I appreciate the offer, Mark," I replied, carefully considering his words. "I'll be honest, the idea of starting fresh somewhere new is tempting. I've been thinking about what the next chapter of my life should look like, and maybe this is it." Mark's face lit up with a grin. "Think about it, Jake. No pressure, but I think you'd be great, and it could be the perfect opportunity to turn the page on everything that's happened here." I nodded, the wheels in my mind already turning. Could I really do it? Leave behind the familiar and venture into the unknown? It was a daunting thought, but also an exhilarating one. The dinner ended with a promise to stay in touch, and as I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the idea that Mark had planted in my head. The thought of moving to the West Coast, of joining his team and starting a new chapter, felt like a breath of fresh air. It was a chance to leave behind the memories that haunted me, to create a new life on my own terms. Over the next few days, I weighed the pros and cons, discussing the idea with Joan and a few close friends. To my surprise, they were all supportive, encouraging me to take the leap if it felt right. "Dad," Joan said during one of our conversations, "you've spent so much time taking care of everyone else. Maybe it's time to do something for yourself. If this move feels like the right thing, then I say go for it. I'll miss you, but we can always visit." Her words resonated with me. For so long, I had been defined by my roles as a husband and a father, but now I had the chance to redefine myself, to pursue new dreams and opportunities. And so, after much thought and soul-searching, I made the decision. I called Mark and accepted his offer, officially putting the wheels in motion for my move to the West Coast. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Selling the house, packing up my belongings, and saying goodbye to the life I had known. It was bittersweet, leaving behind the place where I had built my family, but it also felt like the right step forward. On the day of my departure, Joan and Frank came to see me off at the airport. There were tears, hugs, and promises to visit soon. As I walked through the terminal, a sense of finality washed over me. I was leaving behind the old Jake Marsh and stepping into a new identity, one that was still forming, still discovering who he was meant to be. The plane ride was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. I gazed out the window, watching as the landscape below changed from the familiar green of the East Coast to the vast, sunlit expanse of the West. With each mile, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, replaced by a sense of freedom and possibility. When the plane touched down, Mark was there to greet me, a wide smile on his face. "Welcome to the West Coast, Jake," he said, clapping me on the back. "You're gonna love it here." As we drove through the city, I took in the sights, feeling a sense of excitement build within me. This was my new home, my new life. And as daunting as it was also full of promise. The first few weeks were an adjustment, but I quickly found my footing. The work at Mark's firm was challenging and fulfilling, and I threw myself into it with enthusiasm. The team welcomed me with open arms, and I soon felt like I had found my place. Outside of work, I began to explore the city, discovering new favorite spots and making new friends. The West Coast was vibrant and full of life, and I embraced it all, eager to create a new narrative for myself. One evening, after a long day at the office, I took a walk along the beach, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink. The waves crashed against the shore, the sound soothing and rhythmic. I found a quiet spot to sit, watching as the sky darkened and the stars began to appear. As I sat there, I thought about everything that had led me to this moment, the pain, the heartbreak, the difficult decisions. It had all been part of a journey, one that had brought me to a place of peace and fulfillment. I realized then that life is full of twists and turns, but it's how we navigate them that defines us. I had chosen to move forward, to embrace the unknown, and in doing so, I had found a new purpose, a new sense of self. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I was Jake Marsh, a man who had faced adversity and come out stronger, ready to embrace whatever the future held. And as I gazed out at the vast, endless ocean, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The West Coast embraced me with open arms, and I, in turn, embraced it. The days were longer, the sun warmer, and life seemed to move at a different pace. There was a sense of vibrancy, an energy that permeated everything and everyone. It was contagious, and I found myself smiling more, laughing more, feeling alive in a way I hadn't in years. Work at Mark's firm was going well. The team was dynamic, passionate about their projects, and it wasn't long before I felt like I was part of a family again, this time, a professional one. The work was challenging but fulfilling, and every day brought new opportunities to learn and grow. I was no longer just an attorney. I was an integral part of something bigger, something that was making a difference. But as satisfying as work was, it was the personal growth that truly defined my new life. I had always been someone who focused on responsibilities, my job, my family, my marriage. Now, for the first time, I was learning to focus on myself. One of the first things I did was take up surfing. It was something I had always been curious about, but had never tried. The idea of balancing on a board, riding the waves, felt like a metaphor for my life. Learning to stay upright despite the uncertainty and the constant motion. I remember my first lesson vividly. The instructor, a suntanned local named Kai, had a laid-back demeanor that belied his deep understanding of the ocean. Surfing isn't just about riding waves, he told me as we stood on the beach, the surfboards resting in the sand beside us. It's about understanding the water, feeling its rhythm, and finding your place within it. I listened, intrigued, as Kai walked me through the basics. When we finally paddled out into the ocean, the water cool and refreshing, I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. But as I caught my first wave, the rush of adrenaline was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The moment was fleeting. I wiped out almost immediately, but it was enough to hook me. Over the following weeks, I spent every spare moment in the water. I wasn't great at it, not at first, but I was determined to learn. Each time I stood up on the board, even if only for a few seconds, I felt a sense of accomplishment, a thrill that reminded me of the joys of living in the moment. As I grew more comfortable on the waves, I found myself reflecting on my journey. Surfing became a form of meditation, a way to connect with nature and with myself. I learned to let go of the past, to stop dwelling on what had been, and to focus on what could be. The ocean was vast and unpredictable, but it was also beautiful and full of possibilities, much like my life. But surfing wasn't the only thing that filled my days. I also rekindled my love for music. Back in college, I had played the guitar, often strumming away in my dorm room or at small gatherings with friends. But as the years passed and responsibilities piled up, the guitar had been pushed aside, gathering dust in a corner of the attic. Now, in this new chapter of my life, I decided to reclaim that joy. I bought a new guitar, a sleek, polished beauty that felt perfect in my hands. I started with the songs I used to play, the familiar chords coming back to me like old friends, and then slowly I began to experiment, to create my own melodies, letting the music express the emotions I couldn't always put into words. One evening, as I sat on my porch with the guitar in my lap, the sun dipping below the horizon, I began to play a tune that had been swirling in my head for days. The notes were soft, the melody simple, but it carried with it a sense of longing and hope. As the music filled the air, I felt a peace settle over me, a deep contentment that came from doing something purely for the love of it. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that these new passions, surfing, music, exploring the city, weren't just hobbies. They were ways for me to rediscover who I was, to connect with the parts of myself that had been buried under years of obligations and expectations. They were my way of reclaiming joy, of finding happiness in the present. The friendships I formed during this time were also vital to my healing. The people I met weren't just colleagues or casual acquaintances. They became a support system, a group of individuals who, like me, were navigating their own journeys. We bonded over shared experiences, over nights spent talking and laughing, over days spent exploring the coast and discovering hidden gems in the city. One of those friends was a woman named Olivia, a photographer who had moved to the West Coast a few years before me. Olivia was vibrant, with a zest for life that was infectious. She had a way of seeing the world through her camera lens that made even the most ordinary moments seem extraordinary. We met through Mark at one of his firm's events, and there was an instant connection, a shared understanding of what it meant to start over. Olivia and I spent a lot of time together, exploring the city, hiking the trails along the coast, and occasionally just sitting in a cafe, watching the world go by. She had an uncanny ability to make me see things from a new perspective, to appreciate the beauty in the mundane. Her photos captured life in all its raw, unfiltered glory, and she often shared them with me, each image a reminder of the fleeting moments that made up our days. One afternoon, as we sat on the beach after a particularly exhausting surf session, Olivia turned to me, her camera resting on her lap. "Jake, have you ever thought about what you want your future to look like? I mean, really thought about it?" Her question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on the present, on healing and finding myself, that I hadn't given much thought to what came next. I paused, considering her words. "I don't know, Olivia," I admitted. "I guess I've been so caught up in getting through each day that I haven't looked too far ahead. But I do know that I want to keep living like this, pursuing the things I love, spending time with people who matter to me. I want to keep growing, keep discovering new parts of myself." She smiled, a soft, understanding smile. "That's a good start. I think sometimes we get so caught up in the idea of a future that we forget to live in the now. But if you can keep doing what you love, if you can find joy in the little things, then the future will take care of itself." Her words stayed with me long after that day. They reminded me that life wasn't about grand plans or rigid timelines. It was about the moments that made up the journey, the experiences that shaped who we were becoming. The future wasn't something to fear or to chase after. It was something to welcome with open arms, knowing that it would unfold as it was meant to. As the weeks turned into months, I continued to embrace this philosophy. I found myself more open to new experiences, more willing to take risks and step out of my comfort zone. I started to volunteer at a local community center, helping to organize events and mentoring young adults who were going through tough times. It was rewarding work, and it gave me a sense of purpose, a way to give back to the community that had welcomed me so warmly. And then one day, something unexpected happened. I received a letter from Della. It was brief, just a few lines, but it carried with it a weight that I hadn't anticipated. "Jake," the letter read, "I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I know I hurt you, and I know that nothing I say can change the past, but I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're finding happiness wherever you are. Della." I stared at the letter for a long time, emotions swirling within me. Della's apology was sincere, I could tell, but it came too late. I had moved on, found a new life, a new version of myself that no longer needed her validation. But instead of feeling anger or sadness, I felt a sense of closure. Della's words were a reminder of how far I had come, of the journey I had taken to find peace and joy in my life again. I had reclaimed my happiness, not through her forgiveness, but through my own efforts to rebuild and redefine myself. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, a symbol of the past that no longer held power over me. The future was bright, full of possibilities, and I was ready to embrace it fully. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and a spirit filled with hope, I continued on my journey, one wave at a time, one note at a time, one day at a time. The West Coast was no longer just a new chapter. It was home. And in that home, I found the joy that had once seemed so elusive, now woven into the very fabric of my life. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to live it to the fullest. The weeks following Della's letter brought a sense of finality, a quiet closure to the chapter of my life that had once been defined by heartbreak. I knew now, without a doubt, that I had made the right decision in moving to the West Coast, in embracing the new life that had unfolded before me. Life in this sun-soaked paradise continued to be a journey of self-discovery. The routine I had established, surfing, playing music, exploring the city, and building new relationships, had become the rhythm of my days. But just as I was getting comfortable, life had a way of reminding me that growth often comes from stepping into the unknown. One evening, after another fulfilling day at work, I received a call from Mark. His tone was different, more serious than usual. "Jake, I need to talk to you about something," he began, his voice carrying a weight that immediately caught my attention. "It's an opportunity, but it's a big one that could change everything." My curiosity piqued. I listened as Mark explained that his firm had been offered a major project, a development initiative that aimed to transform a struggling neighborhood into a vibrant community. It was ambitious, with the potential to impact thousands of lives, but it would require a massive commitment. "We're talking about a full-time focus, Jake," Mark continued. "This isn't just another project. It's a chance to make a real difference. But it also means stepping up in a way that might take you out of your comfort zone." I sat back, considering his words. The idea was exciting, no doubt about it, but it also meant leaving behind the comfortable routine I had settled into, diving headfirst into something that would demand all of my energy and attention. It would be a challenge, both professionally and personally, but something about it called to me. "Mark, this sounds incredible," I finally said, my mind racing with possibilities. "But I need to think about it. This would be a huge commitment, and I want to make sure it's the right move." "Of course," Mark replied, his tone encouraging. "Take your time. Just know that I believe in you, Jake. I think you'd be perfect for this, but whatever you decide, I'll support you." We ended the call, and I spent the next few days mulling over the decision. The project was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a chance to leave a lasting legacy, but it also meant that my life would change yet again. I had worked hard to find balance and peace, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to shake things up so dramatically. As I pondered the decision, I reached out to Olivia. We met for coffee at a small, cozy cafe that had become one of our favorite spots. When I told her about Mark's offer, she listened intently, her eyes reflecting a mixture of concern and excitement. "Jake, this sounds amazing," she said after I finished explaining. "But I can see why you're hesitant. You found a good rhythm here, and taking on something this big would definitely change things. The question is, what do you want? Are you ready to take on something that could push you out of your comfort zone, or do you want to keep things as they are?" Her words echoed the thoughts that had been swirling in my mind. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the warmth calm my nerves. "I'm not sure, Olivia," I admitted. "Part of me is excited about the challenge, about the chance to make a real impact, but another part of me is afraid of losing the peace I've worked so hard to find." She nodded, understanding. "It's a tough decision, Jake, but remember, growth often comes from taking risks. You've already proven to yourself that you can adapt and thrive in new situations. Maybe this is the next step in your journey." As we continued to talk, I realized that my hesitation wasn't just about the project. It was about fear. Fear of stepping into the unknown, fear of failing, fear of disrupting the life I had carefully rebuilt. But as Olivia pointed out, I had already faced so much uncertainty and come out stronger. Perhaps it was time to trust myself again. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on how far I had come. Moving to the West Coast had been a leap of faith, and it had led to a life richer and more fulfilling than I could have imagined. Maybe this new opportunity was another leap worth taking. The next morning I called Mark. "I'm in," I said, feeling a surge of excitement and nervousness. "Let's do this." Mark's voice was filled with enthusiasm. "That's great news, Jake. I knew you'd make the right choice. This is going to be an incredible journey, and I'm glad we'll be doing it together." With that decision made, the next few weeks became a whirlwind of planning and preparation. The project was massive, involving multiple stakeholders, community leaders, and a dedicated team of professionals. I was thrown into the deep end, but I relished the challenge. Every day was a new adventure, filled with meetings, brainstorming sessions, and the thrill of watching an idea take shape. The work was demanding, but it was also deeply rewarding. I found myself energized by the possibilities, by the knowledge that what we were doing could change lives. The long hours and the intense focus were balanced by the satisfaction of knowing that I was part of something meaningful. But as the project progressed, I also had to navigate the challenges that came with it. There were setbacks, disagreements, and moments of doubt. There were times when I questioned whether I had made the right choice, whether I was in over my head. But each time, I reminded myself why I had taken this leap, because I believed in the vision, because I wanted to push myself, and because growth never came from standing still. Throughout it all, Olivia remained a constant source of support. She was there to listen when I needed to vent, to offer advice when I felt lost, and to remind me to take a step back and breathe when things got overwhelming. Our friendship deepened, and I found myself relying on her more than I had anticipated. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, Olivia and I went for a walk along the beach. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water, and the air was filled with the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. As we walked in comfortable silence, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The challenges of the day faded into the background, replaced by the simple pleasure of being in the moment, of sharing it with someone who understood. "Olivia," I said after a while, breaking the silence. "I don't know if I've told you this, but I'm really grateful to have you in my life. You've been such a good friend, and I don't think I could have gotten through all of this without you." She smiled, her eyes softening. "Jake, you've been there for me too. Friendship is a two-way street, and I'm glad we've been able to support each other through everything." We stopped walking, and I turned to face her. The setting sun cast a warm glow on her face, and for a moment I was struck by how much she had come to mean to me. "You're right," I said, my voice quiet. "But I think it's more than just friendship for me." Olivia's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look away. Instead, she took a step closer, her expression open and understanding. "Jake, I've felt the same way," she admitted softly. "But I wasn't sure if you were ready for something more." The air between us seemed to buzz with anticipation, with the unspoken words that had been lingering for weeks, maybe even months. I reached out and took her hand, the simple gesture carrying with it a promise of something new, something real. "I think I'm ready, Olivia," I said, my heart racing. "I've been through so much, but I've also grown a lot, and I don't want to let fear hold me back anymore." She smiled, her hand squeezing mine gently. "Then let's see where this goes, Jake. We don't have to rush anything. Let's just take it one step at a time, together." And so, under the fading light of the sunset, we took that first step. It wasn't just a step into a new relationship, but into a future that was full of possibilities, both professionally and personally. I had found someone who understood me, who supported me, and who was willing to walk this path with me. As the days turned into weeks, our relationship grew naturally, built on the foundation of trust and understanding we had already established. We didn't need to label it or define it. We simply enjoyed each other's company, allowing things to unfold in their own time. The project, too, continued to progress, each day bringing us closer to our goal. The challenges were still there, but they felt more manageable, with Olivia by my side and with the team working together so cohesively. We celebrated the small victories, learned from the setbacks, and kept our eyes on the bigger picture. One evening, as we sat on my porch, enjoying the cool breeze and the sound of the distant waves, I realized how much had changed in the past year. I had gone from a man lost in grief and uncertainty to someone who had found joy, purpose, and love again. The journey had been anything but easy, but it had led me to a place where I felt truly alive. "Jake," Olivia said, breaking me out of my thoughts, "what are you thinking about?" As time passed, I settled into my new life on the West Coast with a sense of fulfillment that had once seemed unattainable. The days were bright, and I woke up each morning with a renewed sense of purpose. The pain of the past, once a heavy burden on my shoulders, had become a distant memory, a chapter in my life that had shaped me but no longer defined me. Work continued to be both challenging and rewarding. Mark's real estate development firm was growing rapidly, and I was playing a significant role in its expansion. The legal complexities of the projects kept me busy, but I thrived on the challenges. My colleagues had become friends, and the sense of camaraderie made each day at the office something to look forward to. But as much as I loved my work, I was careful not to let it consume me. I had learned the hard way that balance was essential, and I was determined to maintain it. I continued to surf regularly, finding peace and exhilaration in the waves. My guitar playing had evolved from a solitary pastime to something more social. I often played with a group of local musicians who gathered at a nearby cafe for open mic nights. It was at one of these open mic nights that something unexpected happened. I was playing a song I had written, a simple, melodic piece that reflected the journey I had been on, when I noticed a woman in the audience who seemed particularly engaged with the music. Her eyes were closed, and she swayed gently to the rhythm, a soft smile playing on her lips. There was something about her presence that drew me in, and as I finished the song, our eyes met. After the performance, as I packed up my guitar, she approached me. "That was beautiful," she said, her voice warm and genuine. "Your music has such a calming effect. I could listen to it all night." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a flutter of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Excitement. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. Music has always been a way for me to express what I can't always put into words." She introduced herself as Emily, a graphic designer who had recently moved to the area from Portland. We struck up a conversation, and I found myself drawn to her easygoing nature and the way she spoke about art and creativity with such passion. There was an instant connection, one that felt both comfortable and intriguing. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I spent more time together. We went on hikes, explored art galleries, and shared meals at small, local restaurants. There was a lightness to our interactions, a sense of ease that made being with her feel natural. She had a way of making me laugh, of bringing out the best in me, and I found myself looking forward to our time together more and more. One evening, as we sat on the beach watching the sunset, Emily turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Jake, can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said, curious about the seriousness in her tone. "Do you ever think about the future? I mean, after everything you've been through, do you still believe in love, in finding someone to share your life with again?" Her question took me by surprise, but I knew she wasn't just asking out of curiosity. She was asking because she cared. I took a moment to think before answering. "I do think about the future," I admitted. "And yes, I believe in love. I believe in second chances, in new beginnings. I've learned that life is too short to close yourself off to the possibilities. And I think that finding someone to share your life with, someone who understands you, who brings out the best in you, is one of the most beautiful things there is." Emily smiled, her eyes reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. "I'm glad to hear that, Jake, because I think there's something really special between us, and I'd like to see where it goes, if you're open to that." My heart skipped a beat at her words. This was the first time since Della that I had felt something so genuine, so real. And as I looked into Emily's eyes, I realized that I was ready to open my heart again, ready to explore what this new chapter of my life had to offer. "I'd like that too, Emily," I said, reaching out to take her hand. "I really would." From that moment on, our relationship deepened. We took things slowly, savoring each moment, allowing our connection to grow naturally. Emily understood the scars I carried from my past, and she never pushed me to move faster than I was ready for. In return, I opened up to her in a way I hadn't with anyone else. We shared our hopes and dreams, our fears and insecurities, and through it all, we found comfort and joy in each other's company. As the months passed, it became clear that what we had was more than just a fleeting romance. It was a partnership, a meeting of two souls who had each experienced their own share of heartache and who had come out stronger for it. Emily and I complemented each other in ways I hadn't thought possible, and the love that blossomed between us was something I cherished deeply. Our relationship was built on trust, communication, and mutual respect. All the things I had learned were essential from my previous marriage. And as we continued to grow closer, I found myself more at peace than I had ever been. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds, and ours was no exception. One day, out of the blue, I received a call from Joan. She was in tears, her voice shaky as she explained that Frank had been in a car accident. He was in the hospital, and she was terrified. My heart ached at the thought of my daughter in pain. Without hesitation, I told her I would fly out immediately. Emily, ever supportive, offered to come with me, but I knew this was something I needed to handle on my own. When I arrived at the hospital, Joan was waiting for me in the lobby, her face pale and drawn. She fell into my arms, sobbing, and I held her tightly, offering what comfort I could. "How is he?" I asked, my voice filled with concern. "He's stable," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. but the doctors say it's going to be a long recovery. Dad, I'm so scared. I guided her to a nearby chair and sat down with her, holding her hand. Joan, I know this is hard, but Frank is strong, and he's going to get through this. And you're not alone. You have me, and you have little Thomas. We'll get through this together. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits and conversations with doctors. Frank's injuries were serious, but the prognosis was positive. He would need surgery and extensive rehabilitation, but there was hope for a full recovery. During this time, I realized how much Joan had grown. She handled the situation with a strength and grace that made me incredibly proud. Watching her care for Frank, supporting him through the pain and uncertainty, reminded me of the importance of family, of being there for the people you love when they need you most. As Frank began his recovery, I found myself thinking more and more about the future, about what I wanted for myself, for Emily, for Joan, and for little Thomas. I had found a new life on the West Coast, but I knew that my heart would always be with my family, no matter where I was. When I returned to the West Coast, Emily and I had a long conversation about what had happened and what it meant for our relationship. I told her how much she meant to me, how much I valued the life we were building together. And I also told her about the realization I had come to, that family would always be a priority for me. Emily listened, her expression thoughtful, and then she smiled. Jake, I love you, and I want to be with you wherever that takes us. If that means spending more time on the East Coast, or even moving there someday, I'm open to it. What matters to me is that we're together and that we're both happy. Her words filled me with a sense of peace. I knew then that whatever the future held, we would face it together, hand in hand. Our love was strong, and it had the power to weather any storm. And so, with Emily by my side, I continued to build a life filled with love, joy, and purpose. I stayed connected with Joan and Frank, supporting them through their challenges, and I made sure to prioritize the things that truly mattered: family, relationships, and personal growth. As the years passed, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here, the heartbreak, the healing, the new beginnings. I had learned so much along the way, about myself, about love, and about the importance of living life to the fullest. And in the end, I realized that life is not about the destination, but about the journey. It's about the people we meet, the experiences we have, and the love we give and receive. It's about embracing the unknown, taking risks, and finding joy in the simple moments. With Emily, I had found a love that was true and deep, a love that made every day feel like a new adventure. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that whatever challenges or opportunities lay ahead, we would face them together, with open hearts and unwavering faith in each other. This was my new life, one filled with love, hope, and endless possibilities, and I was ready to embrace it, one day at a time, with Emily by my side and the people I loved always in my heart.